Hi there, it's Darryl Holter from Sussex Heritage Community with another guest post. This time from a good friend from the small village of Ashburnham. So please take time to enjoy this. It's this history that can be so easily lost or forgotten. So this is all social history. So it's titled One Child's Life in a Sussex Rural Village. So, born in the early 60s, I am considered a child of the swinging 60s, a fact that couldn't be further from the truth. My father was a tenant dairy farmer and poultry dealer, my mother a housewife and farmer's wife. Life was good but hard. Cows needed milking twice a day and regularly if you wanted a good return. Money and time were in short supply, but humour and friendship were abundant. Ashburnham, a relaxed rural Sussex village, unique in many ways. It had one of the last, if not the last, handmade wood-fired brickyards in Europe, producing very high-quality handmade bricks. Ashburnham Place has an example of their brickwork, the Orangery, which is reputed to be the best example of brickwork anywhere. As a child in the 60s in Ashburnham, it was a virtually closed environment. We didn't have many incomers, what the locals called anyone who moved into the village. We knew everyone. Importantly, the community worked together like a colony, a unit. We were interlinked, connected and reliant on each other. My grandparents, Frank and Betty White, were landlords of the Ash Tree Inn, eventually serving just over 40 years there. It was part of our daily routine to go there every morning to rebottle the bar and change barrels in the cellar. My grandparents were quite old by the time I was born, so my father supported them daily. As you can imagine, this was a wonderful chance for a young boy to explore an old building. It was full to the brim with old items, nooks and crannies everywhere. However, it was the people that made the village characters that only a village like Ashburnham can produce, unique to their environment. Characters like my father's cousin Jack, who was blind. He worked for my father, rearing the dairy calves, a wonderful man whose knowledge was unsurpassed. I consider myself very privileged to have had him as my babysitter as a child. Today, I am sure it would be frowned upon, a blind man babysitting. Health and safety would have had a field day. Jack taught me many things, and a lot of what he taught me was about areas of life that you would least expect a blind person to have expertise in, like cars and vehicles, which were vastly different and very much less frequent than today. Jack taught me how to identify them and listen for their different sounds. It was not uncommon to have only 3 or 4 vehicles pass the farm each day, one of them being the milk lorry coming to collect the milk. However, Jack knew each one. He recognised their sounds. He could tell from a distance who was approaching. He even knew who was driving the vehicle by the way it was being driven. So my job was to view the vehicle and describe to Jack who was driving it. It was our daily game. Jack rarely lost. The odd travelling salesmen who called to the farm and asked for directions were dumbfounded that a blind man could give them accurate directions to their next destination. Jack memorised everything. He walked to the farm every day, about 3/4 of a mile. He knew every bump in the road. One of our weekly routines was to visit the local blacksmith just along from the farm. Jack would take me there most Saturday mornings to see Mr. Clarence Vaness, affectionately known as Polly. There we would look at old and ancient items he kept there, also help him with the odd task when required. Jack would sometimes toast one of his sandwiches over the forge and share with me. As children, we played football in the road, barely having to give way to a vehicle. We went on bike rides that lasted all day and played tracking games that spanned the whole length and breadth of the village. Nowhere was out of bounds. We were all known. Haymaking and harvest were a community event. local farmers clubbing together to beat the weather, wives bringing afternoon tea to the fields for the men, grand picnics in hot fields with everyone fed and watered. Work continued until milking, and then again after milking until dark. Long, productive hours. The end of haying and the end of harvest were good days. We all ended up at the Ash Tree Inn. Us children would play in the garden with a bottle of shandy and a packet of plain crisps. A real treat. My mother played the piano, so would play for the crowd in the pub, who loved to sing along. The end of the 60s saw the start of a stream of incomers. Many had quite a shock. They were expecting a rural ideal, but found a reality that was far different. Those who accepted the status quo and fitted in were themselves accepted. Those who rebelled or tried to change things were given the cold shoulder. Villagers didn't want change and disruption in their lives, although it was inevitable in time. They rebelled and would dig their heels in. They just didn't talk to incomers if they didn't fit in. No one decided who fitted in and who didn't. It just seemed to be a collective, simultaneous community decision. As time passed, more and more incomers arrived and changed the feel of the village. With more properties being sold off, new money brought them up and moved in. Their ideals and ideas, while good intentioned, were not in keeping with local ways and traditions. They wanted perspective and emblazoned on their properties that they brought. One small timber-framed cottage built by local craftsmen had extension after extension added. They created mansions out of cottages and then sold them off for huge profit. And so on. The scene was set for the future of the village life. Two sides quietly manoeuvring for position. Villagers born and bred, trying to preserve their lifestyle and way of life, and incomers buying their portion of the countryside, then trying to create their own interpretation of country life. Life will never go back to those carefree days. No future generation will experience the free, open nature of rural community, who worked together, looked out for each other, and worked towards a common good. Thank you, Graham. That's really, really interesting and a great piece of social history from here in East Sussex. I hope you enjoyed that from Graham, and I will join you again soon with another, hopefully, guest post. So take care for now. Daryl.